Okay, here we go. It's Russian turn 8. It's 3 p.m., February the 8th, 1807, here at Eylau. And, well, there's been a major development. The Russian commander, being savvy and all that sort of thing, has decided what he needs to do is deny the French a victory. Yes, what a surprise. So, based on the victory conditions, you see, what he has to do is to thwart the French's design to exhaust all of the Russian divisions. And the final one that was unexhausted, as you will remember, was that of Kamensky. So, what they've decided to do is they've taken themselves off for a bit of a march down in this direction. Here we see Kamensky's division, 1, 2, 3 remaining brigades. One has been lost, and his artillery over here, and they're simply marching off that way to put themselves, hopefully, if they can manage it, out of range of the French, who have only got one more hour left. They've only got one more turn. The Russians have got this turn and the next turn. I did say that I'd given myself a house rule for this scenario, which was to say that the Russians were not allowed to simply walk off the table, as it were, to thwart the French. So I'm not actually going to allow them to exit the battlefield. I'm going to say the assumption being that no, they're needed, but they can retire slightly, as it were. They can fall back, so to speak, but they can't just walk off. All right. So, there's a simple logic to this, of course. What they had to do was try and put themselves in a position that the French, in their next turn, would not be able to cause significant casualties on them. And if I can remember, it's, what was it? It was something like 6 more hits would exhaust their division. As I say, their entire division now then is in this area here. It's just the infantry and the artillery. Okay, so in order to win the battle, the French, who caused massive amounts of damage, whilst massive amounts of damage was done to them also, they would have to somehow be able to get through to, well, the closest unit would be this unit here, for example, but they've got to score 6 casualties, so they'd have to hit at least 2 units. So they have to somehow get down there. Obviously, that would have to be with cavalry. All the French infantry belongs to exhausted divisions anyway. They're not even allowed to engage in melee. So now it does get tricky, because the cavalry, of course, what they can do is there is the cavalry breakthrough move. So that means that if they're being blocked by Russians, which, as we can see, which we'll get into the details in a moment, but we've got where is he? Osterman Tolstoy, there he is, right? So Osterman Tolstoy has thrown forward he did have several units in command, so he's thrown forward his Cossacks skirmishing here, thrown forward his disordered, they never could recover from disorder, light cavalry here, hussars, and then also brought forward the dragoons to here. Then Bagavut, the Bagavut's chaps are very, very plucky, and they're trying to cover the retreat, as it were, of Kamensky. And so what they've done is they've thrown themselves, this unit, up to here. It's still not an exhausted division. They are, what are they? I think they're 1 hit away, as I remember, 1 hit away from exhaustion. So they've moved up to there. These chaps here have positioned themselves. They turned themselves around, so they're facing the enemy there. Okay. Let's see. So the threat comes from, of course, the French cavalry. So the question is, could the French cavalry attack some of these forward-posted outlying Russians, as it were, and then do a cavalry breakthrough that would get through to this lot here? Okay. I think the way that the Russians have managed to position themselves is that is now actually effectively impossible. There's just too much in the way. There's this unit, that unit, there's skirmishing, of course, so they will be swept aside. although in contacting them, that of course takes up time, takes away from the move of the unit that contacts them. Then even this one here is a good example. Even there, if someone were to charge them, let's say they, for example, were to, sorry about the focus there, they were to charge them, so they'd have a nice line going down in this direction. But if they were to charge them, if they beat them in the melee, then when they retreat, they can follow them. They can do the cavalry breakthrough along the same line. Of course, they might completely destroy them, in which case they simply go forward in a cavalry breakthrough. So more or less that would take them down to here, but it would take them down to here, you see, which is where the cavalry is, which is blocking them again. And actually, even there, they wouldn't be able to make it because they would, let's see. No, that's not true, is it? No, if they were to charge them, and then they could make a cavalry breakthrough move, which can be up to their full normal move, which is of course 2,000 yards for cuirassier. So that would mean they could cavalry break through to here, which would mean that they would be able to take them on. Okay, so, there we go. Right, what else has happened? Let's see. So we've got these chaps here have just turned themselves so they can fire at the infantry here, because the infantry could move down there and do something, I suppose, or over there. Bagout, of course, if Bagout ends up getting exhausted, it doesn't make a difference in terms of the victory. The French would have to exhaust this division. Right. So they're firing away. These chaps have actually gone stationary, and they're able to, at long range, they're able to fire at the permanently disordered dragoons over there, who did a cavalry breakthrough, as we will remember, a couple of turns ago. Then plucky chaps over here. Let's take a look. Go around this way. Okay. Just fly the helicopter around this direction. Yes, these plucky troops here belonging to von der Ostensachen, what they've done is they were here, and they, what did they do? They did a facing change, and then they obliqued over here, and then they did a facing change, didn't they? Yeah, that's right. So they're facing off against the cavalry. They're just basically trying to sort of generally get in the way. So they're certainly, to an extent, getting in the way of that cavalry unit there, and so forth and so on. And they're also firing as well. So, disordered, yes. So they've only got what have they got? Well, no, they're not stationary. That's right. These chaps here, that's right. I'm thinking these chaps here are disordered, so they don't have their 5 fire dice. They only have 3, because they've still got their dedicated guns. And these chaps spun around so as to be able to fire at the cavalry. And that, in a nutshell, is what's going on. We've only got, there are no charges to adjudicate. So we only actually have one morale test, and that's here, because the cuirassiers here are being fired on at close range by the enemy. So there we go. Actually, let's, seeing as it's such a trifling matter, only one there, let's go ahead and roll them up. So they've got a morale of 6, of course. It's spiffy stuff. And as far as I can see, they don't have any modifiers to that. And they passed the test anyway, so they're looking good. So we can go straight on to combat. Here we go, and if we look at the big picture, we can see that there isn't a lot of combat. So, here we go. Let's get on with it. Right, so we've got these 2 chaps are firing. It's not close range, so they're hitting on 6s. Firing at these chaps here. These are not disordered, so there's no saving throw that has to be considered. So they're both shooting at the infantry there. And what have they got? They've got a hit. Okay, so there's 1 hit there. Now that's going to be 3 hits on that brigade. So let's have a look if that destroys them. And there they are. They're still there. They've taken 3 hits. Interesting. That brigade can take their some heavy duty stuff, because they can take 5 hits. That's a big brigade there. Right. Over here we've got long range shooting. So we're hitting on 6s. All right. We're firing at the dragoons over there, who will be able to take saving throws. Okay, we missed anyway, so nothing doing there. All right. For the rest of the combat, it looks like we go around the other side of the table. Other side of the battlefield, as it were. All right, round we come. Okay, so we have got these chaps are disordered. They're disordered as well. Right, artillery firing at the cuirassier. Disordered. Okay, there's a 4. So first of all, we'll roll for a saving throw from no, it's 4. That's a hit. That's right. It's close range. Of course it is. Right. Did we get a save? We got a save because they were disordered. Yep. So we don't even have to worry about the cavalry withdrawing with saving throws, because it didn't work anyway because they're disordered. Okay. So now we've got fire coming in from here, which is also disordered, which could be against them or could be going to go against them. They're hoping that that's a brigade that's only going to take 2 hits. We'll soon find out that. Okay. Let's see. So 3 hits, 3 shots, but disordered. Okay, well, they got a hit. Okay. There we are. Let's roll to see if they saved from disorder. And they did. Right. So, desultory fire. Those boys missed. Okay. What do we got left? Down here. Now, this was an interesting decision, of course, for the Russian commander, because, of course, if he wasn't firing at them, they couldn't fire back because of the counter-attacking procedure. But they decided that, that's right, before they weren't firing back because they didn't want to risk exhausting their division by having the enemy fire back at them. But they are already exhausted. And so their bloodlust is up now, even though their morale has collapsed and everything. But they say in for a penny, in for a pound, and so they're gonna have a go. Right. So we don't have to worry about winners and losers. This isn't a melee, so I can in fact roll all 6 dice together because there are both the same situation. There we are. They're both disordered. Okay, so against these chaps, scored 1 hit. Drop those off. Okay. Q. Let's see if the hit was saved. And it was not. So that is a hit on them. Don't know if that will remove them. Oh, highly unlikely. They've only got 1 hit at the moment. So they shoot back. They're shooting at the chaps right in front of them. And they missed. Okay. So they've got 1 hit on them. Let's do that. Saint-Hilaire. Oh, yep. I marked it on the roster sheet, but I didn't mark it with a little snowball. There we go. It's another hit on them. And I think, let's see, where was it? Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, they got 1 hit left. Okay. I also went ahead and checked for exhaustion. And so, because Saint-Hilaire, who's already, sorry, not exhaustion, collapse, who's already collapsed, but you still have to roll anyway. They only took 1 hit, rolled for that, they passed. Because if they had failed, you see, units within the division which are disordered will rout. So if he had failed the collapse roll, then that unit there would have routed. Doesn't make a lot of change to the victory of the battle, but it is something that would happen. And the same thing had to be done over there in that direction. Was it for those chaps? If I can point at them with my finger here, those chaps there, the infantry brigade, Monron, one of his brigades. So he took a hit and, oh, but no, he's not collapsed, is he? I shouldn't have even rolled that. Well, there we go. Ha! Passed anyway, so never mind. So there we go. So now it's on to the French final turn, and the way things look from here, it looks just about impossible for them to exhaust that final, exhaust Kamensky. I mean, we don't even know if they can exhaust Bagavout, although, just 1 hit. Good Lord. So let's see if they can do that, and let's see how close they in the end came to victory. Right, I'm about to tell you a tale, or as let's see, Edward Fox said in A Bridge Too Far, "Gentlemen, I'm about to tell you a story you'll tell your grandchildren, and mightily bored they'll be." Anyway, yes, well, because of course I film this stuff and I make the videos and put them on YouTube and all that sort of thing, I was doing a bit of that today with the film that's been shot so far. And of course, the tricky thing about this is because I'm just a wargamer who happens to film what he does, I'm not this sort of major YouTube channel using a lot of editing and all that sort of thing, trying to build this huge YouTube channel. That's not what I'm doing. Anyway, every once in a while, though, when I'm just sort of running through it really quickly, just to sort of make sure that everything's come out correctly and, none of the scenes are shot upside down, which does happen from time to time. But I saw what looked like a really big mistake, and I'm sure that some sharp-eyed observers out there will have noticed it. It happened in I suppose it would be in the last French turn, and it's rather important. And normally I would just sort of say, oh well, you're going to get the odd mistake, it's going to happen. But the thing is that this one is so crucial. I still doubt if it'll affect the ultimate outcome of the battle in terms of whether the French win, but it gives them a much better chance. The problem was, yes, and you've guessed it, the problem was here. This unit of cuirassiers was here attacking them, as was this unit, and they, of course, were using cavalry breakthrough, so they were in permanent disorder and they were here. Okay, so here and here. But the thing is that because their friends that used to be here had run through them, they were disordered. They were being attacked by the two cuirassier units, one of which was disordered, okay, but one of which wasn't disordered. So that means it's cavalry shock. So they were hitting on 5s and 6s, not just 6s. And you'll remember that the permanently disordered chaps attacking from here scored nothing. And then these chaps here scored nothing, or so I said, but they actually rolled 2 5s. Okay, so that was 2 hits. They were disordered. They scored 1 hit themselves. They were disordered, but they got 2 hits scored on them. They were already disordered, so that means they lost the melee and they would have routed. Now, the enemy was here and here, so they would have routed in this direction down here. That brigade has only got 3 strength points, so it would have lost 1 strength point as a result of routing, already taken 2 hits, so it would have been completely eliminated. So it would have been eliminated. It would have run through these chaps, disordering them. That would have caused the division to go into exhaustion and possibly collapse. And, of course, the cuirassier here and those who are actually carabineers, yes, we've talked about that before, would have been here and ready if they chose to. One of them could have advanced to that position there. Now, the problem I have is that since all that took place, we've had the entire Russian turn. They've moved, and of course they've done actions based on the fact that they were still there, based on the fact that Bagabut's division was not exhausted. So if I just turn around now and change things, it's a less than ideal solution, but I think I actually have to do it. Now, it doesn't completely upend things, because even if that unit there, which is permanently disordered, and this unit here are back in this position here and this position here, the key thing is that this hill is in between them and Kamensky. Let me think. Okay, I suppose. Let me think. No, they're okay. The key thing is they can't see Kamensky. Because if they look in this direction here under the Volley and Bayonet rules, there's your line of sight. So you take a perpendicular line like that and you run it through the center of the hill, which is there. So you go like that, So that's where the crest line is. So even if they, let's say a decent unit, which is not disordered, even if they were just bang there, basically, they're still on the downside of the crest line. So they could not see the Dragoons here, for example, and they couldn't see Kamensky's forces there. And of course, if you can't see them, you can't charge them, you see. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get rid of that unit. I'm going to exhaust the division. So that means that finally Bagavout has become exhausted. And I'm going to put those 2 units of cavalry back there, because the way things are right now, because of that one mistake I made, it's just too big. I don't like it. And at the end of the day, this is not the sort of international Volley and Bayonet championship. This is Jeff playing in his wargame room. So, there you go. That's what we're going to do. Okay, so yes, I know it's very upsetting for wargamers of a sensitive disposition, but there we go. The die is cast, so to speak. And I did indeed cast a die, because I rolled for Bagavout's morale collapse, and he survived. So they didn't have that insult added to injury. So we've got his 2 remaining brigades here are both marked as exhausted division. There's old Bagavout himself, marked exhausted division. The brigade that was here, which was massacred by the cavalry, has gone. Then, let's see, the cavalry, which ran away, has come back because they're actually victors. So that one didn't advance after combat. It made a facing change. And this one did advance after combat to that position there. But as I say, we don't have to worry about him now suddenly being able to charge Kamensky, because he's got the hill in the way. The crest line of the hill is there, so he can't see. Interesting thing that I want to explore is there are lots of V&B things that I'd like to explore, apart from just, more battles and all that sort of thing in other periods and so forth. But I think it's, if I can remember the name, one of the big figures, of course, in V&B is Jeff Glasgow, I think it is. And he's got his rules for the American War of Independence, as we say over here, or the American Revolutionary War, as folks say in the States. And in there, he's got lots of interesting house rule ideas that are not necessarily to do with that particular war, but just generally for V&B. And one of them is the notion of being able to charge an enemy that you cannot see at the beginning of your move. And so, of course, that would mean that there we could simulate that the cavalry are here. It's reasonable to say, well, they know the enemy is somewhere on the other side of the hill, so they could say, charge, and off they go, and they just sort of hit who they hit. And I think under Jeff's modifications, I think they're allowed to do that, but they attack the enemy with some sort of negative modifier on their morale test or something like that. But there were several little things in there that I definitely want to try out. We're really wandering now off the subject, but the other ones I want to try out is there is a set of rules for English Civil War. I've got lots of English Civil War figures. I'd like to do a bit of that. And the shortage there seems to be scenarios. There's a very workmanlike 3-page set of adjustments to the rules, but I can only find one scenario so far. I think that was Edgehill. And then beyond that, what else was I going to look at? Yes, well, I've got lots of 15mm figures. That's right. I've got about 1,000 15mm American Civil War figures that I can use to do some Volley and Bayonet stuff. And also, I'm thinking about next battle will probably be a large 7 Years' War battle in 6mm, like my previous battle of Molwitz was, which is, of course, on my channel. Anyway, right, moving on. Okay, so here we are. It's turn 4 p.m., February the 8th, 1807, here at Eylau. And the French have made their move. They hold out no prospect of winning the battle. They're not going to be able to achieve the victory conditions. But they have decided to just sort of attack basically everywhere, just so that they can see how much damage they can do to their Russian enemy. All right, so let's go through and take a look at what's developed. So we have these chaps here, which, although they're in an exhausted division, they cannot... that's what I'm saying. They can't charge the enemy, that's right, but they can certainly harass the enemy with fire. So that's what they're doing there. They're shooting at those chaps there. And then down here, we've got, well, the artillery's gathered around to have a bash at Bagavut's now exhausted division, because they all they could do was turn. They wouldn't have been able to, even if they had been able to go over here, they wouldn't have been able to unlimber in time to fire at those chaps. So instead they just rotated, and they're going to be firing on these chaps here. Let's see, we've got Goudin has moved his brigade forward there. They're firing as well. They can't charge them? What am I saying? No, they can't charge them in an exhausted division, that's right. But they can fire on them. And then we've got one of Nonsouti's brigades here is indeed charging these chaps in the flank. They are cavalry secure. They are stationary. They do belong to a exhausted division, but that... wait a minute. No, you lose your stationary status for that, don't you? Hang on. There was me thinking, well, they're not disordered, so they can be stationary, but they can't. They're not disordered, but they are an exhausted division. Note the marker. Note the division commander too. But that's why I like those markers. They remind me, I don't have to sort of keep on, looking to the division commander to see if they're exhausted. So there we go. They're not disordered, but they are exhausted. So they can't be stationary. So they're in an even worse situation. Right. So you got these chaps hitting them in the flank. Okay. Morale test, obviously. They're taking a morale test because they are being... Why are they taking a morale test? You would take a morale test because you're being fired at... you're in melee, or you're being fired at in close range. That is not close range for them. So they're not taking a morale test, are they? Yeah, they're not being fired on by any close-range artillery or anything like that. No. So there's no morale test there. My mistake. Okay. What are you going to do? Okay. Moving down then. They're taking a test, obviously, because they're in melee. Then we've got two cavalry brigades here have surged forward and are hitting the Russian hussars, the light cavalry here, in the flank. Okay. Now, what I've done is I've taken the unusual expedient of bringing on these odd, what do we call them? Dice with an unusual number of sides. Yes. That sort of thing. They're required for various games. Remember old D&D and all that sort of thing? Marvellous. But no, I've just put them on as markers, aide de memoire to myself, which of course is a good thing if you're French. You need an aide de memoire. To remind me that in these three cases, I need to come up with a different marker, probably some sort of figure in some unusual pose to indicate cavalry shock. You could do it with a single cavalry figure, couldn't you? Yeah, some sort of very excited looking single cavalry figure. Anyway, cavalry shock, because there, we have cavalry brigades that are not disordered attacking opponents who are disordered. So remember, that means they hit on 5s and 6s, and I really wanted to get that into my head because that's what we had, that situation here, which we just cleaned up a few moments ago, where they rolled 5s and they should have scored hits, and I didn't have them score hits because I'd forgotten that they had cavalry shock. Anyway, so they've got the cavalry shock factor there. They don't because they're disordered, and these chaps have got it up here as well. Right, so they're in bad shape here. They're probably going to do rather badly out of this, and they're already disordered, so they're almost certainly going to get routed. Actually, I believe they have no hits, do they? Yeah, they have no hits on them, so They could be completely destroyed. They're probably only 2 hits, or even if they get only 1 hit, come to think of it, when they rout, they lose another point. But if they're not completely destroyed right there and then, they would rout and they would run into these chaps, which would disorder those chaps there. Okay. Now we've got the permanently disordered dragoons over here are going to sweep the jolly old Cossacks who are skirmishing out of the way. They'll have to retire to about here-ish, and then they can then carry on their move, and they will be able to hit these chaps here. That's pretty much a certainty as far as I can see. But of course they are permanently disordered, so they're not going to inflict a lot of hits. And these chaps here, although they're not stationary, they have got... they don't have dedicated guns, so they've got 4 dice in melee, so they're, pretty respectable. Unless, of course, they are disordered. Okay, but in all of that, as you can see, there's just no way for the Russians to get at Kamensky. No, not going to happen. Okay, so what else have we got? This one here we've already discussed in some detail. These chaps are disordered. Okay, carrying on, going around. So then down here we've got some artillery that was sort of around this general area. Was either limbered or horse artillery, was able to go over here, unlimber, and fire at these chaps here. They are not firing back because the only people firing at them are these chaps, and they don't have the range to reach the artillery. You can only fire back in defensive fire, as it were, or counter-attacking as it's called. You can only do it, and if it's firing, you can only do it at units who fired at you. So they are not firing at them. So they can't fire at them, for example, and they can't fire at the artillery because they're too far away. Okay? So they are taking a morale test because they're within the close range of the enemy. Okay? Enemy's fire. Okay, and then down here, finally, let's see, these are disordered. So, yes... That's right. The key point is they're not stationary, but they do have dedicated guns, so they've got 3 dice. And then these chaps here are not stationary, and they don't have dedicated guns, so they have 2 dice. Right. Whew, that's the whole thing. Let's do some morale tests. All right, so we'll start off down here on these musketeers down on the end there, Bagavout. They're in a bad situation with Cuirassier hitting them in the flank. But they've rolled a 2, so they're lucky chaps, and they've said something to the effect of, "We think nothing of your morale test. Ha! We'll laugh at you, you French people." Something along those lines. And then in go the French, the cold steel. You see, yes. So roll up for them. They've got a morale. They got a morale of 6. And they have nothing to their disadvantage, so as is usually going to be the case, I'm not going to bother rolling for them, just to make the point. Let's see, the line of sight would go that way, so figuring out the crest of the hill from the V&B point of view, the line of sight to the enemy is that way. The centre of the hill is there, so that would mean the crest of the hill would be there. Okay, so therefore... do they count as being uphill? Ah, they do. But, that's right. On uphill, unlike hitting in flank, when you hit somebody in the flank on the morale test, there's an effect for the attacker and there's an effect for the attacked, okay, the defender. As far as being on a hill goes, the only way it affects the morale test is if you are defending on a hill. So they would get a bonus, but they don't get a negative. Okay, so they've got a morale of 6, so they can't fail it, so we won't bother taking the test. Right, they've got a morale of 7. They're not taking a morale test. Oh, they are disordered, so they have a morale of 6, I should say. So even if they roll a 6, they pass. They've got a morale... they've got a morale of 5. So if we roll a 6, they fail their morale test, which would be very disappointing. Who's that? Beaumont with his dragoons. Let's see what he can get up to. He's fine. Who are they anyway? They are, I suppose that would be something like Boyer, Dragoon Brigade. Okay. Oh, Boyer. Right, moving along. These chaps here, they've got a morale of 6 there. And if anything, they're going downhill at the enemy. And they're not disordered, so I'm going to give them a pass. And I'm going to give them a pass too. They've got a morale of 6. There we go. Pop that up there. Okay. And then we've got morale tests over there for the Russians. Let's do that. Okay. These chaps here, testing because they're being fired on at close range. They've rolled a 4. They've got a morale of 5 and they're disordered. So, and which means, well, they would have passed anyway, but they also have the benefit of defending uphill. So nothing wrong with them. Okay, and then these chaps here, let's see. They're disordered. They have a morale of 5. Let's see what they roll to start off with. Right, so their morale's gone down to 4 because they're disordered. But they're not flanked or anything, so I say they're okay. Stout fellas. These chaps here, let's see, why are they testing? They're testing because they're entering a melee. Now, I wasn't quite sure about this, but it says it's treated as if... Well, actually, no, wait a minute. It says that the skirmishers, if they're hit by formed cavalry, are treated as if they have lost a melee. So I don't think we're supposed to test for this. So I don't think... Yeah, that's right. This isn't counted as a melee, as it were. So I think we'd get rid of those two. Those shouldn't have been there. No, I don't think that's how you do this. So what you need to do is when we come to it, we'll move them out of the way. That's what happens there when you hit skirmishing cavalry with formed cavalry. Right, and then they'll be able to press on to them. Okay. Right. Which I imagine at that point, surely they would have to take a morale test then. Otherwise, it means you're getting into a melee without any morale tests. So when they press into them, should probably do that now. Okay, so as near as I can see, that's what we do. So the skirmishers had to retreat directly away from the enemy. So they had hit them. Well, they were there, so they had to move back to here. Okay. They're disordered when that happens. They were then able to continue on to hit to hit these troops down here, who are not stationary, but they're not disordered either. So they've actually got 4 dice. They have no dedicated guns, and because a melee has just started here, I'm adjudicating that. Well, this is a melee, so you need to take a morale test. Of course you do. So there we go. We're going to do that now. It's a little bit unusual, but there we go. So let's see what the French get out of this. They are disordered, and I don't see any other negativity in the situation, and they rolled a 2 anyway, so they're fine. And then we get to the Jaegers, who are not disordered, and they have a morale of 5. And just as well they weren't disordered, because if they had been, they would have lost the morale test. Yes, failed the morale test. Just use the correct terminology. You know. Yes, do a proper job. Okay, so now finally we test. The only one left by the look of it is the Russian Hussars, and they are disordered, and they have been hit in the flank. So. Let's just check the old, the factors on that. Use the right side of the reference sheet, it always helps. So let's see, flank attack. Yep, and they are disordered. So they got a -2, and they started off with a morale of 5, surely, yeah. So their morale is 3. So let's see what happens. Well, plucky chaps, they stood their ground. Okay, so that's the end of all the morale tests. I don't think anybody failed their morale test, did they? Okay, plucky chaps. Let's do the combat. Okay, as far as I can see, this is the last time in the game that the battle, that we're going to see the possibility of any more damage being done to the all-important Kamensky's division, Right. It can't win the battle, but at least they'll have the satisfaction of causing a casualty, maybe. Right, so we've got these two over here. Of course, they're scoring on 6s, but they're disordered, so they're going to be saving throws, firing at those chaps there, and nothing doing. Okay, back in the box. Here we go. So, that's that. All right, over here, let's see, we're firing at close range here at these chaps. Are we firing at close range? No, we're not, are we? No, nor are we. We are not. No. So they're firing at long range, so they're hitting on 6s, both of them. Doesn't matter which one I roll. Firing at those chaps there. Hitting on 6. Oh my goodness me, look at that. Ooh. Well, you know, 1 in 36. It's going to happen every once in a while, but good Lord, that was an opportune time for it to happen. Doesn't make much difference to the victory conditions, but there we are. Okay, well done, chaps in the artillery department. Yes, old Davout's reserve artillery and Goudin's divisional artillery. Okay. Then we have Goudin's petty infantry brigade, who's plinking away here. Well, at least they're not disordered. Nothing there. Okay. Right. So then the Russians fire back with a respect. Oh, no, they're not going to do that, are they? Whoa. Hang on a second. Calm down. Calm down. No, there's a melee, a small matter of a melee going on. Right. Okay. So no hits scored on them so far in this overall combat. Let's see what the cuirassiers can do. Yeah, no cavalry shot because they're not disordered. Okay. Cuirassiers have done nothing. God, they're all dressed up smartly in this shiny breastplates and all that sort of thing. And what do they get? Nothing. Okay, and now we have the plucky musketeers are meleeing back. Now, of course, they're only meleeing the cuirassier, looking for 6s. And they've got 1, so they won the melee. Look at that, attacked in the flank by cuirassier, and they won. No, wait a minute, they didn't. They didn't lose. They didn't win the combat. No, because you mass it all together. So they took 2 hits, and they took 1 hit. So the French won the melee. Yes, they did. Okay, because you add everything together, the firing and the actual melee. So that means they've lost the melee, which means that they're disordered, and they're going to have to retreat away from the middle of the body of the enemy, which is surely, well, there's 2 of them, so the middle would be sort of there-ish. So if they retreat away from that, they're going to be going basically that way there, okay? Well, I hope I've done this one right. I actually had to reverse everything because, let's see, although they took 2 hits, and the French cavalry that were here took 1 hit, they were eliminated. And if you're eliminated, or it says a side which is completely eliminated cannot win the melee. Okay, so you might sort of say, well, the casualties were calculated by evaluating fire from here and the melee from the French there, and the French looked at that way. If the French side consisted of the cavalry and the infantry, who are not in contact, then the French infantry are still there, so therefore they weren't completely eliminated. But I don't read it like that. I think that because the French cavalry, which are the ones in contact, were eliminated, the French cannot be said to have, because that's the situation you would have ended up with, and the French cannot be said to have won that melee, even though they took 2 hits and the French cavalry there took 1 hit. So the French cavalry were wiped out, and those chaps remain in situ. That's the way I'm adjudicating. Right, okay. So we can move on. Now we might get into a situation here where the French player wants to do this in a very particular sequence. So I think I might actually start off. I'm just going to have a little think about that. Right, well, I don't think I've thought of anything particularly clever, so I'm just going to crack on. We've got the melee here with the permanently disordered dragoons. up against these chaps here. It doesn't look good for the French. Well, let's just crack on. So the Dragoons are going in with their 4 dice. There we go, up against the Russian. What are they? The Russian Jaegers. There we go, from Bagovut's crumbling division. And well, there's a hit there, but they are disordered. So roll for a save for the Jaegers, and they failed to save, so they get a hit on the Jaegers. Okay, they've currently got 1 hit on them. Okay, so it's not going to wipe them out. All right, let's see what the Jaegers can do back. Okay, there we are, hitting on 6s, of course, and they've got nothing, so they lost that melee. Right, here we are. I can't remember if permanently disordered cavalry can do a breakthrough. I mean, I had considered this. I had considered, well, maybe they can beat them and then carry on. I frankly didn't look it up because I wasn't, I think maybe it didn't stay in my mind because I knew that even then they'd come deliberately, they'd come up against these. They've come up against the chaps that the Russians are deliberately put in their way, which are from Ostam and Tolstoy, so it still doesn't help them get at Kaminsky. I don't think, if they're permanently disordered, I don't think they can do a cavalry breakthrough. I'm going to look that up. Right, okay, so where were we? That's right, they're permanently disordered. It turns out, no, they can't do a cavalry breakthrough if they're permanently disordered. They can advance after combat into the position in the space occupied by the enemy, or they can stay where they are, or they can do a facing change. As it turns out, they've decided to stay exactly where they are. But this does illustrate also the bit of a puzzle, which maybe, I don't know, I've just got some sort of mental block, but I can't figure out what to do in the rules. Let's ignore that the artillery's there. Imagine if that was an infantry unit there. So this infantry would have had to have retreated down here, but it would have ended up on top of them. Now, not in the first half of their move, like moving through them and disordering. It would just have ended up on top of them. So you either put them short of there, or you put them beyond that, or you push the infantry back, but I'm not seeing where that's covered in the rules. I must be missing something, I'm sure. We know that because it's cavalry, if there had been nothing but cavalry here, it turns out there's artillery too, but if there had been nothing but cavalry, they would have come back here, formed cavalry, they would have come back here and stopped, because the idea is that you can deliberately put cavalry behind your infantry to stop them running away, in other words. It's a tactical decision. So they would have stopped in front of the cavalry, they wouldn't have tried to squeeze through them if it's in the second half of their move. Here, however, on the other hand, we had artillery was the first thing that they came up against. So I just sort of rounded things off and said, okay, we'll just make them stop there. Let's just do that. Okay. It won't make any difference to the rest of the battle because the French can't attack them anyway. So there we go. But you do see the puzzle, yes. Right. Unless, of course, there are kind souls out there who can see the rule, read the rules more clearly than I can and know what to do in these complex situations. Right, but anyway, pressing on. Now I've got a big old mother of all melees going on over here. So we've got the poor beleaguered hussars who are disordered, and they are, well, yes, they're being attacked in the flank, but we've already gone through all that in the morale test, so they've got 4 dice, the hussars do. So they split their dice between the 2 enemies. So first of all, we'll have them going at the cuirassiers and not getting anything out of that. And then we'll have them going at the dragoons. Let's get that more up that way. There we go. Put it up there. There we go. The dragoons. And they've got nothing there. All right. So now we have the cuirassier thundering. Oh no, that's the one I have to keep saying. Actually, they're carabiniers. Okay, but they look like cuirassier from here. So they are disordered. So they've got one hit, but we roll for a save. Okay, there we go. Roll for a save because they're disordered. And there's no save there, so that's a hit on them. They don't have any hits on them yet, so there we go. Then we've got, now this is where we use this to remind us that 5s and 6s are hits here, because this is cavalry shock. And we have only one hit anyway. No save on that. Okay, so there are 2 hits there on the hussars. So not surprisingly, the French have won the melee, and I'm almost certain that the hussars are going to have been completely wiped out by that. So there we are. The hussars that were there have been wiped out. Osterman Tolstoy's hussars, and the French have not moved forward, and they have not done a breakthrough, because frankly there's no point whatsoever. If anything, it would possibly give the Russian artillery there a better thing to shoot at. So there we go. They're rallying in place. Right. So then we have, yes, a really big bash here, don't we? Yes. So we've got both these units here using cavalry shock against these poor old troops of von der Ostensachen, which are themselves disordered. Yes. So let's see. Coming in from von der Ostensachen, we've got 5 dice. So we're going to have to aim 3 of them, split as evenly as possible between the enemy. Let's put 3 of them, perhaps logically, against this one, which is a bit more in front of them. So we'll do that. And remember, they're disordered, so we get a saving. They get 1 hit, and the French get a saving throw against that one. And they've failed to save, so they've got hit by them. Okay. And whoops, sorry. And then there's 2 more left at the other Cuirassier Brigade of d'Espagne. No, nothing there. Okay. Then on come the cavalry with their cavalry shock. Right, so here we go. First batch going in, hitting on 5s and 6s. And we've got 2 hits there. Let's see, these chaps. Oh, those chaps haven't actually been hit. No. Okay. All right, so we take, is that hit there still in place? Okay. Then the next batch with cavalry shock coming in. And there's another hit. Okay. So that might eliminate that unit. Not sure. Let's look at it. Okay, so old d'Espagne here. Another hit on his division. But they can take 3 hits before they get exhausted, so they're not exhausted. Okay. If they wanted to, they could do a cavalry breakthrough. They could charge forward at this point. But there's no, I mean, thing is they have to charge where the enemy was, so they have to charge that way. So there's just no point. They're going to bother with that. Well, I suppose you could argue that if they... How does that work? If they did that, they could put themselves out of the firing arc. Yeah, they can do that, can't they? Now, that would mean that they would permanently disorder themselves. But they would get them out of the firing arc of that. I mean, it's not going to win the battle. It's not going to change the result. But if they are able to get, they got 1 shot, so they could get 1 hit on them. They could exhaust that division, which wouldn't look good in the newspapers, and would upset civilians at their breakfast. So I think they're going to do a sort of canny manoeuvre. And yeah, they are. I think they are. They're gonna go forward. Can they both do that? I think they can. So now they are permanently disordered, but at least they can't be hit by the guns right at the moment. It's a heck of a thing to permanently disorder some shiny cuirassier like that, but yeah, I'm just trying to get it, just thinking of what will look good in the newspapers and try and get them out of the way of those Russian artillery. Okay, so that means, let's see, the Russian artillery, I'm just wondering if the Russian artillery now can fire that artillery there. It's a question of line of sight. So if you said the center, I'm going to, let's sort of not split hairs, because you could sort of say, well, if the center of the hill is sort of there, there's just a tiny little bit of the corner of that can see them, but I don't like that. I think that's pushing things, so I'm going to take that away from them. They can't fire at anyone because they can't see anyone. Right. So what do we got left? It's hardly an earth-shattering difference, but there we go. Right, so we've got all this incoming fire on these chaps, and then we have a musketry duel here. Right. So these are all firing. These are all firing at short range, so they're all hitting. No, I have got to roll them separately because some of them are disordered. Right, okay. So this is not disordered, hitting on 4, 5, 6. So there's a hit there. All right, these two are disordered. They're looking for 4, 5, 6, and they didn't get it anyway. Right. Okay, so there's one hit on them. We'll do that in a minute. And then we're just going to sweep down the line and finish up all the combat. Here, these are disordered, so they didn't get any hits anyway. And then finally, there we go. These are also disordered, and they didn't get any hits anyway. Okay, right. So there's one hit there on them. So it's von der Ostensaken. Who is it? Muromsk. Right. Let's look them up. And well, would you look at that? Regiment Muromsk was eliminated. Yes. So all that's left of von der Ostensaken's corps is this this regiment here, Dnieper Regiment of Musketeers. The artillery, and that's it. Yes. So I think I'll have a bit of a I'll tidy up the battlefield, and we'll take a look at the way things stood at the end of the final French turn. Right. So also, incidentally, I did several die rolls just then to see, I think, Gudin and von der Ostensaken and Bagavut and also Osterman Tolstoy, they all took hits to exhausted divisions, so they had to roll to see if their morale had collapsed. Some of them are already collapsed, but of course the collapse can happen again, in which case disordered units rout. And they all four passed their tests, surprisingly too, because one of them at least had taken 4 hits. So there we go. So they all passed. So what have we got left? What have we got left? Well, I don't know what the Russians are going to do next, of course, because, well, the thing of it is that the French are in no position to score, well, apart from them, I was going to say they're in no position at all to score any casualties on Kamensky's division, which is what would be necessary to win the battle. They'd have to exhaust it, which is impossible right now because they're the only ones who could fire at them. And the most they could do is score 2 hits, and they need 6. So the Russians could, if they wanted to, they could just say, all right, chaps, tea break, here's a good fellow. And, you know, wheel out the samovar and tea all round, you know, and have a bit of a sit down and that sort of thing. They don't need to do anything. In other words, they have indeed won. This is not a draw. The Russians have won. Now, you look at the battlefield and, you know, take it from this end, for example, the direction from which the French are attacking. Well, we've got these chaps sitting here on the, that's not the end of the world. No, that's a road, right? So they're sitting back here, but we can see, all right, Down here, von der Ostensaken, as I say, all that's left is that one brigade of infantry and an artillery unit. Everything else is gone. The French cavalry are sailing forward, dragoons and heavies sailing forward here, dragoons down there, heavies here, okay, battered infantry there, but there's nothing in front of them. And that, of course, is because Kamensky was told by the commander-in-chief, whoever that was, to withdraw his division. So they've done that smartly. They've turned about and gone off down in this direction, keep themselves out of harm's way. And the French only had until 9 o'clock to exhaust them all, and they failed. So therefore, the Russians have won the southern battle of Eylau. Right. So sometimes in a situation like this, it happens a lot if I'm playing a board game and I can see, that there's just sort of no point really in carrying on. Sort of like, oh, well, I don't know. Maybe we should see what might have happened. But all the Russians could do is they could just sort of carry on marching further away. Under my house rule, they're not allowed to leave the table. Or if they had some really juicy opportunity, they could say, well, just for the newspapers, just for tomorrow morning's newspapers, we're going to try and, I don't know, eliminate that unit there. Let's do that. Let's have the dragoons. Oh, I suppose they could. The dragoons there. This is beginning to sound interesting. There'd be some certain satisfaction there. Dragoons there could charge. No, they can't charge them. No, they're exhausted. Yeah, they're exhausted. Of course they can't. Now, the only people who can charge are Kamensky, and they're not going to do anything like that because that would risk casualties, which would risk losing the battle. So they're not going to do that. Let's see. Well, they could do a little. I suppose, it seems a shame to sort of skip the Russian last turn because we've come this far. But no, it is very interesting because, as I said, now we're in a situation where 6 more casualties on Kamensky would win the French the battle. But the French have run out of time. Okay, fine. But I'll tell you, when I set this thing up and we were basically able to deploy the Russians in a sort of continuous line of mostly infantry that was stationary with dedicated guns and in some cases up a hill, I sort of thought, what on earth can the French do to make a dent in this? So, of course, the sort of classic military puzzle there, sort of a, here's a good problem. What do you do in this situation? And, of course, if the defender is got this marvellous position, but the problem then for the defender is if they just stay where they are and the attacker can come up against them either with repeated attacks or with potent missile troops, then of course they can fire away and damage the defender. And if the defender's only tactic is just to stay put, then they are going to take losses. And then of course if they can be damaged enough, then you can get to a point where the French can consider sending in their massive quantities of cavalry, which they did. I don't particularly see some sort of massive mistake that the French made. I don't think you could sort of say, well, they should have attacked with the cavalry earlier. But no, I don't think so, because the Russians weren't vulnerable enough for them to do that. The cavalry would have just been destroyed, much like these chaps here, who sort of course, they went in for the attack and they were repulsed. And there they are, back there. They can't charge anymore. So, right. Anyway, I need a glass of water.